The party was in full swing, the laughter and chatter echoing through the room. People were mingling, enjoying drinks, and celebrating what felt like an ordinary evening. The atmosphere was light and carefree, with the music adding to the cheerful energy. The guests seemed relaxed, talking about everything from their kids to the latest movie releases. But amidst the laughter, there was a subtle tension forming between two people, a husband and wife. She, the wife, was the kind of woman who had always been determined and focused. She had a passion for her career, something she had worked hard to build over the years. She loved her job, the challenges it brought, and the fulfillment it gave her. Tonight, she was talking to a group of her friends about an exciting new opportunity at work, her eyes lighting up as she shared her excitement about her upcoming project. She had big plans, and nothing could stop her from pursuing them. However, as she spoke, her husband stood nearby, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His smile, which had once been genuine, now seemed forced, and his eyes had a distant, almost irritated look. He had always been supportive of her career in the past, or so she thought, but lately there was a change in him that she couldn't quite explain. His unease had been building for a while now, and tonight it felt more apparent than ever. At first, the wife didn't notice his growing discomfort. She was wrapped up in her conversation, telling her friends about the new opportunities that had opened up for her. She spoke with passion and pride, knowing how far she had come in her professional life. She was proud of what she had achieved, and the thought of giving it all up was unimaginable. She loved her work and the way it made her feel, confident, capable, and strong. But her husband's silence was becoming louder. Finally, unable to hold back any longer, he interrupted. He asked her if she had ever considered quitting her job and focusing more on their family. His voice was sharp, and his words cut through the light-hearted chatter. The room grew quieter, and the other guests paused, sensing that something wasn't quite right. The wife, taken aback by his sudden comment, tried to brush it off with a laugh. She explained how much she enjoyed her work and how it was important to her. She told him that quitting her job was simply not an option, not after everything she had worked for. She tried to reassure him, but her husband didn't seem convinced. His face darkened as the conversation shifted. His frustration was evident now, and he began to argue, his tone growing more forceful. He said that a wife's place should be at home, taking care of the family, supporting him. He seemed to believe that her career was something she could easily give up for the sake of their marriage. The wife, stunned by his words, felt her heart race. She had never heard him speak like this before. She knew he was upset, but she hadn't expected this kind of reaction. The guests around them exchanged nervous glances, unsure how to intervene. The tension was thick, and the wife's stomach tightened. She had never imagined a situation like this, where her passion for her job would cause such an intense disagreement. But as the argument continued, she couldn't help but feel the weight of her husband's disapproval, and it was beginning to hurt more than she had anticipated. She tried to explain herself again, but her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. The evening that was supposed to be fun, a time to relax with friends, was slowly unraveling, and the once joyful atmosphere now felt strained. The argument between the husband and wife grew louder, and the room became tense with every passing moment. The wife tried to stay calm, but the words her husband was saying stung. He kept repeating that it was time for her to stop working and focus more on their home life. He argued that she was spending too much time at the office and not enough time with him. His frustration seemed to grow with every word, and the wife could feel the weight of his disappointment pressing on her shoulders. As her friends looked on, some of them exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do. They had never seen the couple argue like this before. The wife had always been known as someone who was dedicated to her career, but it was clear that her husband didn't share the same view anymore. The wife's heart raced, her mind spinning with thoughts. She didn't want to upset him, but she couldn't just give up the thing that made her feel fulfilled. Her job wasn't just a paycheck. It was something she was passionate about, something that brought her purpose and pride. The tension between them was undeniable now, and it felt like the air was thick with discomfort. Her husband continued to push the point, now raising his voice slightly, demanding that she make a choice. "It's either me or your job," he said firmly, as if there could be no other option. The wife was taken aback. How could he ask her to make that choice? She had never been forced to choose between her career and her marriage before, and the thought of giving up something she loved so much was painful. She tried to explain again, her voice shaking slightly as she spoke. "It's not that simple," she said. "I love my job, but that doesn't mean I don't love you or our family. I'm doing this for us, for our future." But her words seemed to fall on deaf ears. Her husband's mind was made up, and his tone became more rigid and unyielding. He told her that he couldn't stand being with a woman who valued her career more than him. The wife felt a wave of sadness wash over her. This wasn't the man she had married. She remembered the early days of their relationship when they had supported each other's dreams and ambitions. But now, it seemed like everything had changed. She wasn't sure when or why things had shifted, but it hurt to see how far apart they had grown. She loved him, but she couldn't deny the passion she had for her work, and it felt like he was trying to erase a part of her that she had worked so hard to build. As the argument continued, the room grew even more uncomfortable. The other guests had fallen quiet, no longer knowing how to contribute to the conversation. Some of them tried to steer the discussion in a lighter direction, but the tension was palpable. The wife could feel the eyes of their friends on her, and it only made her feel more vulnerable. She didn't want to cause a scene, but she also couldn't let her husband dictate her life in this way. Her mind was racing, torn between the love she had for her husband and the career that had become a vital part of her identity. She had worked so hard to get where she was, and the thought of abandoning it all was unbearable. But at the same time, she didn't want to lose her husband, the man she had once dreamed of building a life with. It was a painful crossroads, and she felt trapped between two worlds. The argument between the husband and wife reached a boiling point, and the tension in the room was unbearable. Everyone in the room had been listening in silence, unsure how to react. The wife, feeling completely overwhelmed, tried to hold back tears, but her emotions were starting to show. She wasn't used to feeling so powerless, especially in front of friends. Her chest tightened, and her voice quivered as she spoke, but she was determined to stand her ground. "I can't just quit my job," she said softly, her words barely above a whisper. "This isn't about not caring for you or our family. I'm doing this for us. I want a future where we both thrive." But the husband, his face flushed with frustration, wasn't having it. The way he was looking at her now was different. It was cold, almost dismissive. It was as if he couldn't even hear her anymore. His expression hardened, and with a flash of impatience, he raised his voice again. "Why can't you understand?" He snapped, his tone cutting through the air. "You're choosing your career over everything else. Over me, over our marriage, over our future." The wife felt her heart sink as the words hit her. It was a blow she hadn't been prepared for. She had always thought that their marriage was built on mutual respect and understanding, but now it felt as if he was questioning everything she had done to get to this point in her life. Was it really possible for her to have both, her career and a healthy marriage, or had she been fooling herself all along? Her friends and family, who had been standing nearby, suddenly became more visible in the background. They were watching, unsure how to intervene or whether they even should. The wife could feel the weight of their gazes, each one a reminder of the public spectacle this argument had turned into. She had never wanted to air her dirty laundry like this, especially not at a party meant to be fun and carefree. But now her relationship was laid bare in front of everyone, and it felt like a betrayal in itself. The husband, still fuming, didn't seem to care that they were in front of guests. His anger was too great, too overwhelming. He began to speak more harshly, his words becoming sharper with every sentence. "Maybe you just don't care about us anymore," he said bitterly. "You don't even see how much I've sacrificed for you, for us. You've become so focused on your job that you're blind to everything else." The wife felt a sharp pain in her chest. She had never thought of herself as someone who would choose a job over her marriage, but in that moment, it felt like that's exactly what her husband thought. The pain of hearing those words from someone she loved so deeply was almost too much to bear. She had worked tirelessly to build a future for them both, but now it seemed as though all of her efforts were being thrown back in her face. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The room was silent except for the muffled sounds of the party continuing in the background. The wife was frozen, unsure of what to do next. She looked around at the faces of their friends and family, hoping for some sign of support, but they were just as stunned as she was. Then, without warning, the husband took a step closer, his frustration reaching its peak. His body language became more aggressive, and the wife instinctively stepped back. But before she could react, something unexpected happened. He raised his hand, not in a gesture of argument, but in what seemed like a quick, instinctive motion. It happened so fast that the wife didn't fully comprehend it until it was too late. In the blink of an eye, her husband's hand was coming toward her, and with a sudden, alarming motion, he struck her, not with force, but with an overwhelming emotional outburst. The room went deathly quiet. It was a sharp slap to the face, a cruel and unexpected gesture that left everyone stunned. The wife's cheek stung from the contact, but it wasn't just the physical pain that hit her. It was the emotional blow that shattered her. Time seemed to slow down as the wife stood there, stunned, unable to process what had just happened. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. She just stood there, wide-eyed and in shock. The other guests, equally shocked, seemed frozen in place. The mood in the room had shifted completely. No one knew what to do or how to react. The husband, realizing what he had done, stood still for a moment, looking at her with wide eyes. His anger seemed to dissipate, replaced by a sudden panic. But the damage had been done, and the wife couldn't unsee the way he had lost control. The hurt in her eyes was clear as she slowly turned away, stepping back from him. Her face was red, not just from the slap, but from the humiliation, the shock, and the sense of betrayal that had just been unleashed. The room was silent. The laughter and music that had filled the air just moments before seemed to have evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming stillness. The wife stood there, her cheek still stinging from the unexpected slap, her mind racing to catch up with what had just happened. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to comprehend her husband's actions. The shock was almost suffocating, and for a moment, she couldn't move. She didn't know what to do, what to say, or how to react. Around her, the guests were frozen. Some looked at each other, unsure of how to intervene, while others were clearly just as stunned as she was. No one had expected things to escalate so quickly. This was supposed to be a joyful evening, a time for friends and family to relax, not a moment of emotional chaos. But now, everything had shifted, and the weight of what had just occurred hung heavy in the air. The wife slowly turned away from her husband, her eyes welling up with tears. She didn't want to cry in front of everyone, but the emotions were too overwhelming to control. She needed to get out of there, away from the eyes of their friends and family, away from the humiliation, and away from the man who had just struck her. She excused herself quietly, not wanting to make a scene, but knowing that she couldn't stay in that room any longer. The tears flowed freely now, a release of everything she had been holding back. She quickly made her way out of the party, finding herself outside, breathing in the cool air as she tried to steady herself. Her mind was a whirlwind. How could this have happened? She had never imagined that her husband, the man she had loved and shared her life with, could act this way. She had always known that they had disagreements, but nothing like this. The physical strike was not just a moment of anger. It was a shocking betrayal of trust. She had always believed that their love was built on respect and mutual support, but now she wasn't so sure. What kind of love was this? The wife sat down on the steps outside, her hands trembling as she wiped away her tears. She couldn't stop thinking about the moment in the party, the shock of it all. She had never seen him like this before. So angry, so completely different from the man she had married. She had never seen him lose control like that, and the realization made her feel both sad and afraid. She thought about what to do next. She couldn't just go back inside and pretend that everything was fine. The damage had been done. She needed space to think, to process, and to understand what had happened. Her heart ached, not just from the slap, but from the confusion and disappointment she felt. She had never imagined a situation like this, and she didn't know where to go from here. Inside the house, her husband stood motionless, still reeling from his own actions. His anger had dissipated, replaced by guilt and regret. He had never meant for things to go this far. He loved his wife. At least, he thought he did. But now, as he stood there, he realized how much he had hurt her. He knew that he had crossed a line that couldn't easily be undone, but there was no way to take it back. The moment had passed, and the damage was done. He could feel the weight of his actions settling on his chest like a heavy burden. He looked around the room at their friends, but no one seemed willing to speak. They were all avoiding eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. His mind raced. What had he done? How could he fix this? But deep down, he knew that nothing would erase what had happened. He had hurt the woman he loved, and nothing could change that. The wife remained outside for a long time, her mind spinning with questions. She thought about the future, about their marriage, and about her own strength. This wasn't just about a disagreement anymore. It was about something deeper, about trust, respect, and the boundaries they had both set in their relationship. She had always been strong, but now she wasn't sure if she was strong enough to fix this. For the first time, she felt completely alone. She didn't know what to do, but she knew one thing for certain. She couldn't go back to the way things were. She needed time to figure it out, time to think about what she truly wanted and what she deserved in a relationship. She couldn't allow herself to stay in a marriage that made her feel small, insignificant, or unsafe. As the night wore on, she continued to sit outside, her thoughts scattered, her heart heavy. The pain wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional and deep. She had no idea what the next steps would be, but she knew that something had changed, and it could never be the same again. The night stretched on, but the wife didn't move from where she sat. The cool air did little to calm the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind. She had come outside to escape the chaos inside, but the quiet of the night only amplified her confusion. She sat there, staring at the ground, her hands folded tightly in her lap as she tried to collect herself. It was hard to focus on anything else when her heart was still racing from the shock of what had just happened. How could everything have gone so wrong so quickly? The anger from the argument was gone now, replaced by a painful silence between her and her husband. She thought about what he had said, how he wanted her to quit her job, how he didn't understand why it was so important to her. She had tried to explain, to make him see that it wasn't just about her career, but something deeper, something that gave her a sense of purpose. But instead of listening, he had reacted with frustration, and then the unthinkable had happened. She looked up at the sky, the stars barely visible through the city lights, and sighed. There was so much uncertainty in her life now. The future that had seemed so clear just hours ago now felt clouded with doubt. She loved her husband, but she couldn't ignore what had just transpired. Could she continue in a marriage where she felt dismissed, where her dreams were treated as unimportant? The slap wasn't just a physical blow. It was an emotional one that reached deep into her heart. She had always believed in their partnership, in their ability to work through problems together, but now she wasn't sure what they had left. Her mind drifted to her friends inside, to the awkward silence that had filled the room when everything had escalated. They must have been as stunned as she was, unsure how to help, unsure of what to say. It wasn't easy for anyone to witness the breakdown of a relationship like this. It wasn't supposed to happen at a celebration, in front of so many people. The wife felt the weight of their stares, the pity, the uncomfortable glances that had followed her as she made her way out. It made the situation even harder to face. As time passed, the pain in her chest didn't subside, But a new feeling began to settle in: clarity. She realized that she couldn't continue down this path without addressing the larger issues at hand. Her career wasn't the problem. It had never been. The problem was how her husband had reacted, how he had tried to control her choices, how he had dismissed her desires and needs. She wasn't sure when or how things had gotten to this point, but she knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. She thought about how far she had come in her career. All the long hours, the sacrifices, the hard work. It had all led to this. It was her dream, something she had built for herself, and no one had the right to take it away from her. She had always been strong, independent, and capable of making her own decisions. But now, she had to decide if she could still stay in a marriage that didn't support that part of her. Tears welled up again, but they were different this time. They weren't just tears of sadness, but tears of realization. She had spent so many years putting everyone else's needs above her own. But now, she realized that she couldn't keep doing that. She couldn't keep living in a relationship where she felt like she had to choose between who she was and who her husband wanted her to be. The longer she sat there, the more certain she became of one thing: she needed to take control of her own life. She had spent so many years trying to make things work, trying to keep everyone happy. But now, she had to focus on herself. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she couldn't go back to the way things were. She had to make a choice, and it wasn't going to be an easy one. But in that moment, she finally understood what she needed to do. With a deep breath, the wife wiped away the last of her tears. She stood up, her legs shaking slightly, but with a sense of determination. She wasn't sure what the next steps were, but she knew that the road ahead would be different. She would find a way to reclaim her own happiness, her own peace, and whatever that looked like, she was ready to face it head-on. The night had passed in a blur, and the morning arrived with a strange sense of stillness. The wife had not slept much, her mind running in circles as she thought about what had happened and what needed to happen next. She sat on the edge of her bed, the soft light from the windows spilling across the room, but there was no comfort in it. Everything felt uncertain, and she felt a heavy weight pressing on her chest. But as the hours passed, she realized that she couldn't keep living in this fog of confusion. She needed to confront the situation, to face her husband and their fractured relationship head-on. With a deep breath, she stood up and walked to the kitchen. She knew what she had to do, but the thought of it made her stomach turn. She wasn't sure what kind of conversation awaited her, but it was something that couldn't be avoided any longer. She had to talk to her husband to finally address the deepening cracks in their marriage. When her husband had come to the party the night before, he was nothing like the man she had known. The man who had once supported her career, who had been proud of the progress she had made, had been replaced by someone she didn't fully recognize. His frustration had turned into anger, and his anger had led to something she never thought he was capable of. It wasn't just about her job anymore. It was about control, and it was about how he saw her place in their relationship. She found him in the living room, staring out the window, lost in thought. He didn't seem to notice her at first, but when she stepped closer, he turned, his expression a mix of guilt and shame. She saw that he had been awake for a while, but there was something different in the way he held himself. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes avoiding hers. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. She could feel the weight of the past few hours hanging heavily in the air, but she wasn't sure how to break it. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady but quiet. "We need to talk," she said, her words hanging in the air like a fragile thread. Her husband nodded, his eyes still avoiding hers. "I know," he said softly, his voice almost apologetic. "I'm sorry about last night. I didn't mean it. Any of it." The wife's heart wavered for a moment. She had heard him say sorry before, but this time, it felt different. It wasn't the simple apology she was used to. It was laced with regret, but she wasn't sure if it was enough. The anger from the night before still stung, and it wasn't something she could just forget. "I don't know what happened," he continued, finally looking up at her. "I've been so frustrated. I thought I thought I was doing the right thing by asking you to stop working. I thought it would bring us closer, but I see now that I was wrong." His voice trailed off, and she saw the conflict in his eyes. She could tell he was struggling to understand his own actions, but she knew the explanation wasn't enough. His anger had come from somewhere deep inside, and it wasn't just about her job. It was about control, about his own insecurities, and it was something they needed to address. The wife took a deep breath, steadying herself before speaking again. "You didn't just hurt me last night. You made me feel like I had to choose between my career and you. And that's not something I can do. I've worked so hard for what I have. And it's not just about the job, it's about who I am." Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. She wasn't just talking about her job anymore. She was talking about herself, about her independence, her strength, and the respect she deserved. It was a moment of realization for both of them. Her husband was silent for a long time, taking in what she had said. There was a moment where she wasn't sure if he understood, if he could even comprehend what she was asking of him. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter this time. "I've been selfish," he admitted. "I've been thinking only about myself, about what I wanted, not what you needed. I'm sorry for that." His apology was different this time. It wasn't just a simple statement. It felt sincere. But even as he spoke, the wife knew that this was just the beginning. They had a long way to go before they could truly move past what had happened. This wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. She wasn't sure if their marriage could be saved, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let herself lose who she was. She wasn't going to let anyone take away her dreams. "I need time," she said softly, her voice unwavering. "Time to think. Time to figure out." The days after their conversation were long and filled with uncertainty. The wife spent time alone, trying to piece together the emotional wreckage of the night before. It wasn't easy, and her mind often drifted back to that moment. The look on her husband's face when he had apologized, the weight of his words. She had heard the regret in his voice, but she couldn't ignore the hurt that still lingered. It was hard to move past something so profound, especially when the betrayal had cut so deep. But she knew that healing, if it was possible, would take time. She spent her days reflecting on her own needs, trying to untangle the complex feelings that had built up over the years. The truth was, she had always put others' needs before her own. She had sacrificed pieces of herself to make her marriage work, to make everyone happy. She had done it out of love, out of the desire to create harmony. But now, she realized that in the process, she had lost sight of who she really was. She had become someone who would bend to others' expectations, even if it meant compromising her own dreams. And that was the realization that had hit her the hardest. She couldn't live like that anymore. She had spent so much time trying to please her husband, trying to build a life that made him happy, but she had neglected her own happiness. She had worked tirelessly to build a successful career, but when push came to shove, it felt like it had never truly been supported by the one person she expected to understand. She felt torn between the love she had for her husband and the life she had built for herself, a life that she was proud of, a life that made her feel strong and capable. Her friends, who had been concerned about her since the night of the argument, reached out to check on her. They could sense that something had shifted. They offered their support, their comforting words, and they reminded her of the strength she had always shown. They knew her better than anyone, and they believed in her. Their encouragement was like a lifeline, something to hold on to in the midst of her confusion. The wife felt their love and support, and it helped her to remember who she was outside of her marriage, outside of the expectations placed on her. Her husband, on the other hand, was trying his best to respect her space. He had spent the days reflecting on his own actions, trying to understand where his anger had come from and why he had reacted the way he did. He knew that his behavior had crossed a line, and it was something he deeply regretted. But he also knew that words alone couldn't fix what had happened. He had to show her that he was willing to change, to work on himself, and to make amends in a way that was more than just an apology. One evening, he sat down with her again, his face filled with sincerity. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," he began. "And I know I've hurt you, more than I can say. But I want to prove to you that I'm willing to change. I don't want to lose you. I love you, and I want to support you, truly support you, in everything you do." The wife listened quietly, her heart still heavy, but starting to open. She had heard the words before, but this time they felt different. This time, it wasn't just about the apology. It was about a willingness to change, to understand her needs, and to be a partner in the truest sense of the word. But as she listened, she realized that while his words were important, they were not enough on their own. She needed to see action. She needed to feel like he truly respected her autonomy, her career, and her dreams. "I need you to understand that my career is part of who I am," she said softly, looking him in the eye. "I can't give that up, and I won't. But I need to know that you can respect that you'll support me in it, not try to change me or make me choose." Her husband nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand," he said. "I can see now that it wasn't about your job. It was about my own fears, my own insecurities. But I don't want to hold you back anymore. I want to be the partner you deserve." The wife took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of hope and uncertainty. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt like there was a possibility of healing. There was a chance that they could rebuild, but only if both of them were committed to change. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight, but they had both taken the first step by acknowledging the issues that had been tearing at their relationship. The journey ahead would be difficult, but it was a journey they would have to take together. The days that followed were filled with quiet changes. The wife had taken the time to reflect and focus on herself, rediscovering the strength that had always been inside her. The process wasn't easy, but she felt more centered and clear-headed than she had in a long time. She realized that her happiness didn't depend on anyone else's approval, especially not from someone who couldn't fully understand her dreams. She was ready to take control of her life in a way she never had before. Her husband, too, had spent time reflecting on his actions. He knew that simply saying sorry wasn't enough. Words couldn't undo the damage caused, but he was determined to show her that he was willing to work on himself, that he truly wanted to be a better partner. The tension between them had started to ease, but there was still a lingering uncertainty in the air. She didn't know if their marriage would ever be the same, but she knew that the only way forward was through honest conversations and real change. One evening, after a long day at work, the wife came home to find her husband waiting for her in the living room. He looked up at her with a soft smile, but there was a seriousness in his eyes. She sat down next to him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if they were both gathering the courage to put their thoughts into words. "I've been thinking about everything," he began, his voice steady but sincere. "I know that I've made mistakes, and I've hurt you. I never meant to, but I let my own fears get in the way of being the partner you need. I want you to know that I'm here, and I'm willing to change, not just for you, but for us." The wife looked at him, taking in his words. She could see that he was trying, that he genuinely cared about fixing things between them. But it wasn't enough just to hear him say the words. She needed to see the actions that matched them. She had been hurt, and she knew that healing would take time. There was no magic fix, no quick solution, but she was willing to take things one step at a time. "I hear you," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "But I need to be clear about something. I need you to understand that my career isn't just something I do. It's a part of who I am. I can't lose sight of that, and I won't. But I also don't want to lose us. I want to find a way to make this work, where we both respect each other's dreams and support each other in our own journeys." Her husband nodded, taking in her words. "I understand. I know that now. I want to be there for you, for everything you want to achieve. I was wrong to think that your job came between us. What really matters is that we both support each other's goals." The wife felt a glimmer of hope stir inside her. She wasn't sure if everything would be perfect, but she could see that there was a willingness to understand and grow together. For the first time in weeks, she felt like maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what had been broken. It wasn't about fixing everything overnight. It was about taking the steps, small as they were, toward healing. The next few weeks were filled with subtle shifts. They both worked hard to improve their communication, to understand each other's needs, and to find balance between their personal dreams and their shared life. They took time to listen, really listen, to each other, to be more patient, and to compromise when needed. It wasn't always easy, but they were both committed to making their relationship work. As the wife continued to pursue her career, she felt more supported by her husband. He made an effort to understand the challenges she faced and celebrated her successes, no matter how small. In return, she made time for him, for their relationship, and for their shared life. It wasn't perfect, but they had found a new rhythm, one that allowed room for both their individual dreams and their shared future. Slowly, the tension that had once threatened to tear them apart began to fade. They started to trust each other again, not just with their hearts, but with their goals and aspirations. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a beginning where both of them could grow, not just as a couple, but as individuals who respected each other's strength and dreams. As time passed, they both learned valuable lessons about love, respect, and the importance of supporting each other's journeys. The wife realized that she didn't have to choose between her career and her marriage. She could have both, as long as they both worked together to make it work. And her husband, too, learned that love wasn't about control. It was about support, trust, and mutual respect. In the end, it wasn't the challenges they faced that defined their relationship, but how they worked through them together. And with every step, they learned that the strength of their love lay not in perfection, but in the willingness to understand, to change, and to grow alongside each other.